Look closely at the men who tell themselves they still have time. Most of them don't realize the clock isn't ticking loudly anymore. It's already gone quiet. I want you to imagine a woman at 65, not bitter, not broken, calm, settled, and most important, no longer testing men. That detail should disturb you more than it comforts you, because when a woman stops testing, she hasn't become easier. She has become finished choosing. As a psychologist, I've listened to thousands of men explain why they delayed commitment, delayed growth, delayed emotional courage. They tell themselves they were being rational, strategic, independent. But underneath that story is a quieter truth. They were afraid of being evaluated before they were ready, so they waited. And while they waited, women learned. Here's something most men are never told. When a woman is younger, her tests aren't games, they're questions. She's asking, without words, are you safe? Are you consistent? Are you emotionally present? Can you grow with me? Every boundary she sets, every moment she pulls back, every challenge she presents is data gathering. She's studying your nervous system, not your status. But over time, something shifts. After decades of disappointment, compromise, and emotional labor, many women don't test anymore. Not because they trust men more, but because they've stopped expecting men to rise. And when that happens, you're no longer being evaluated as a partner. You're being filtered as an accessory, temporary, optional, easily replaced. Men often believe the danger is rejection. It isn't. The real danger is indifference. Rejection still means you mattered enough to assess. Indifference means the interview never started. This is where, before it's too late, becomes real. Not dramatic, not romantic, psychological. Because attraction doesn't die from lack of looks or money. It dies from lack of emotional signal. When a man avoids growth, avoids accountability, avoids discomfort, women don't argue forever. They adapt. They lower expectations. And then one day, they stop testing entirely. And here's the uncomfortable part. Many men misinterpret this phase as success. She doesn't challenge me. She's easygoing. She doesn't ask for much. They don't realize they've entered the zone of emotional retirement. She's no longer investing. She's coexisting. You need to understand this deeply. Tests are invitations. They mean she believes you could become more. When those invitations stop, it's not peace. It's closure. The men who end up alone at 65 aren't usually the cruel ones. They're the delayed ones. The ones who always plan to become better later, stronger later, more self-aware later. They underestimated how quickly women learn who will never arrive. So if something in you feels uneasy right now, that's good. Unease is awareness forming, because the question isn't whether women change over time. They do. The question is whether you evolve before the tests end. Or whether you wake up one day realizing no one is asking you anything anymore. And that silence is not freedom. It's the sound of time deciding for you. Men are rarely taught how attraction actually ages. They're taught to chase outcomes, youth, beauty, attention, but not to understand the emotional economy underneath it all. And that's why so many are shocked when years later, the rules seem to change without warning. Here is the truth most men miss. Attraction doesn't disappear suddenly. It erodes quietly when growth stalls. Women don't wake up one day and decide men aren't worth testing. They arrive there after years of unanswered effort, every unspoken need, every emotional bid ignored, every time she had to become smaller so you could stay comfortable. From a psychological perspective, tests are stress simulations. They reveal how you respond under emotional pressure. Do you get defensive? Do you disappear? Do you listen without fixing? Do you take responsibility without collapsing into shame? These moments are not traps. They are forecasts. Women are projecting a future with you and asking, can I survive here? When a man fails these tests repeatedly, the woman adapts, not angrily at first, quietly. She starts self-soothing instead of communicating. She lowers expectations instead of negotiating. She learns not to lean, and eventually, she stops testing because she already knows the answer. Men often confuse this stage with maturity. They say, she's not emotional anymore. She doesn't argue. She's finally calm. What they don't realize is that calm without curiosity is emotional withdrawal, and withdrawal is the beginning of psychological separation. At 65, the woman who no longer tests isn't cold. She's complete without male validation. She's learned to regulate her own nervous system. She's learned that expecting men to change hurts more than being alone, so she chooses peace over possibility. This is where regret forms for men. Not dramatic regret, but quiet, chronic regret. It shows up when conversations feel empty, when intimacy feels procedural, when no one asks you hard questions anymore, when no one cares enough to challenge you. Psychologically, men age differently than women. Many men postpone emotional development because society rewards external success. Money can delay accountability, status can hide emotional immaturity, but biology doesn't pause, time doesn't wait for readiness. And eventually, the internal gaps become visible. What women notice over decades isn't your confidence, it's your capacity to self-reflect, to repair, to sit with discomfort without running. Men who never develop this capacity often find themselves surrounded, yet deeply unseen. And here's the hardest truth. Women don't stop testing because they stop caring about men. They stop because they start caring about themselves more. By the time she reaches that later stage of life, she's no longer interested in potential. Potential is expensive. She wants evidence, presence, emotional literacy, and if a man hasn't built that by then, no amount of charm will reopen the door. So if you're listening and thinking, I'll change when I meet the right woman, understand this. The right woman doesn't wait forever. She grows past men who postpone themselves. And the most dangerous place for a man to live is in the illusion that time is neutral. It isn't. Time is selective. It rewards those who mature early and quietly closes doors for those who keep saying, not yet. There is a moment in every man's life when he realizes no one is coming to demand more of him. No teacher, no partner, no authority. And that moment feels like freedom, until it doesn't. From a psychological lens, this is the turning point where many men either evolve or emotionally plateau. When women stop testing you, the external pressure disappears. And without pressure, character is revealed. Growth either becomes self-driven or it stops entirely. Most men never notice when the tests end. They only notice years later when intimacy feels thin and admiration is gone. They say things like, she changed, without realizing the truth. She adapted because you didn't. A woman's testing phase is not about control, it's about safety and future mapping. She's scanning for consistency over time, for emotional endurance, for the ability to hold complexity without shutting down. When those qualities never stabilize, she stops investing energy where the return is predictable disappointment. Here's something rarely discussed. Men often outsource their emotional development to women. They rely on partners to challenge them, organize emotional life, and push them toward growth. When a woman withdraws from that role, many men feel lost, not because they loved her deeply, but because they depended on her direction. By the time a woman reaches an age where she no longer tests, she has already grieved. That grief happened quietly while the man was distracted. She mourned the version of him that never arrived. And once that grief is complete, hope doesn't return easily. This is why men in later life often describe a strange loneliness, even inside relationships. They're not alone physically, but no one is emotionally engaging them anymore. No one is asking, who are you becoming? Because the answer has already been assumed. Psychologically, this creates a delayed crisis. Men start chasing validation instead of growth, younger attention, short-term admiration, anything that makes them feel chosen again. But being chosen without being challenged is hollow. It doesn't build legacy. It doesn't build depth. The men who avoid this fate do one thing differently. They develop an internal examiner. They don't wait to be tested. They ask themselves the questions women eventually stop asking. Am I emotionally safe? Do I listen to understand? Can I repair when I hurt someone? Do I face discomfort or escape it? These questions are uncomfortable. That's why many men avoid them. But discomfort is the entry fee to relevance, not just to women, but to life. Because the truth is, women don't want to stop testing men. They do it because they've learned that many men never rise unless forced. When that lesson repeats long enough, they choose themselves. So the real danger isn't that a woman at 65 won't test you. The danger is realizing too late that no one ever will again. And without tests, without challenge, without friction, a man doesn't sharpen, he fades. The question you should be asking yourself now isn't whether women still want you. It's whether you're becoming the kind of man who doesn't need to be tested to grow. Because the men who wait for pressure to change usually discover that pressure leaves before they do. Here is the part most men never confront until it's too late. No woman is responsible for your awakening. Not at 25, not at 45, and certainly not at 65. The men who age with regret all share one belief, that life would eventually force them to grow, that a relationship, a crisis, or a woman's patience would become the catalyst. But psychology doesn't work that way. Growth that is outsourced is fragile. Growth that is chosen is permanent. When women stop testing, they haven't given up on men. They've graduated from needing men to feel whole, and that is deeply threatening to men who never learned how to self-evaluate. Because once a woman no longer needs you emotionally, she sees you clearly, not through hope, not through fantasy, through reality. And reality is unforgiving. At later stages of life, women are no longer impressed by ambition without follow-through, confidence without depth, or charm without consistency. They've seen those patterns repeat for decades. What they respond to is emotional steadiness, accountability, the ability to sit in silence without tension, the ability to hear truth without collapsing or attacking. Men who didn't build these traits earlier often feel invisible, not because women ignore them, but because women no longer search them for potential. There is nothing left to excavate. This is where time becomes the final examiner. Not harsh, not angry, just precise. If you are listening to this and feeling exposed, that's not shame. That's awareness. And awareness is the last window before habit hardens. You still have agency, but not infinite time. Ask yourself this honestly. If no woman ever challenged you again, would you still grow? Would you still question your reactions, your emotional patterns, your avoidance? Or would you settle into comfort and call it peace? Because comfort without evolution is slow decay. The men who remain magnetic across decades aren't louder or richer. They are internally disciplined. They don't wait to be evaluated. They refine themselves because they respect the future version of who they will become. And here is the equation I want you to sit with and answer in the comments. Growth chosen early, plus accountability maintained daily. Relevance that never expires. So ask yourself, where in your life are you still waiting to be tested instead of choosing to evolve? If this message made you uncomfortable, it's because it was meant for you. Write your answer in the comments. Like this video so it reaches men who are still asleep. Subscribe for more truths most men hear too late. And share this with one friend who needs to hear it before time makes the decision for him.